For 3 years, my husband told me he was working late every Thursday. Then one afternoon, a complete stranger handed me a photograph, and my marriage was over before I even looked at it. My name is Claire. For 12 years, I believed I had the kind of marriage people dreamed about. My husband, Michael, wasn't perfect, neither was I. But we laughed together. We paid our bills together. We supported each other through job losses, family illnesses, and every difficult season life threw at us. If someone had asked me whether I trusted him, I would have answered without hesitation, with my life. Looking back now, I realize betrayal rarely begins with one big lie. It begins with 100 tiny ones that seem too small to notice. Michael owned a small construction company. His business was growing. He often worked long hours. Sometimes he came home after 9 o'clock, sometimes even later. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, he smiled and kissed my forehead. Just work, Claire. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Marriage is built on trust, at least. That's what I thought. Every Thursday. He said he had an important client meeting. He never missed it. Rain, snow. Even on our wedding anniversary one year. He apologized and said the meeting couldn't be cancelled. It bothered me. But I convinced myself it was part of building our future. Sometimes love sounds a lot like making excuses for someone else's behavior. One Thursday afternoon, I finished work earlier than usual. I decided to surprise Michael by bringing dinner to his office. When I arrived, his secretary looked confused. "Michael isn't here today," I smiled. "He must be at his client meeting." She frowned. "What client meeting?" "He took the whole day off." My heart skipped a beat. I laughed awkwardly. "There must be a misunderstanding." She shook her head. "He booked today as annual leave 3 weeks ago." I drove home in complete silence. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was overthinking everything. The following Thursday, I decided not to ask questions. Instead, I followed him. For almost an hour. His car stayed on the motorway. Then he pulled into a quiet seaside town nearly 40 miles away. He parked outside a small blue cottage. I watched from across the street. A woman opened the front door. She smiled the moment she saw him. Then she kissed him. Not like friends, not like co-workers, like two people who had done it 100 times before. I couldn't breathe. Everything around me became silent. I wanted to run across the road, demand answers. Instead, I drove away. Sometimes the truth hurts too much to face immediately. For the next week, I said nothing. Michael came home smiling, asked about my day, watched television beside me, held my hand during dinner. It amazed me how normal he looked, while carrying such a huge secret. I started paying attention, really paying attention. Receipts, phone calls, bank statements, little inconsistencies. The more I looked, the more I found. Hotel bookings, restaurant payments, expensive gifts I'd never received. The affair hadn't lasted weeks. It had lasted almost 3 years. Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, an elderly woman knocked on my front door. She introduced herself as Margaret. She lived next door to the blue cottage. She looked nervous. "I think you deserve to know the truth." She handed me an old photograph. It showed Michael, the same woman, and a little girl, around 4 years old. All three were smiling, like a family. I felt the world disappear beneath my feet. Margaret quietly said, "That little girl believes your husband is her father." I couldn't speak. She continued, "I didn't know he was married until last week." When I found out, I couldn't stay silent. That night, I didn't confront Michael. Instead, I placed the photograph on the kitchen table before he came home. When he walked inside, he froze. His face turned completely white. For almost a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Claire." I interrupted him. "How long?" He lowered his head. "Almost 3 years." Those 4 words ended 12 years of trust. He admitted everything. The woman was named Rebecca. They met during a construction project. The little girl was his daughter. He had been living 2 different lives every Thursday. He wasn't working late, he was playing the role of husband in another house. I asked him the only question that mattered. When were you planning to tell me? He couldn't answer, because the truth was, he never planned to. The divorce wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no broken furniture, just lawyers, paperwork, and silence. Sometimes silence hurts more than anger ever could. I moved into a smaller house, started over. It wasn't easy. For months, I questioned everything. Was any of our marriage real? Did he ever truly love me? Eventually, I realized something.
2 things can be true at the same time. Someone can love you and still make choices that destroy you. Love without honesty isn't enough. 2 years later, I met someone new. He wasn't charming like Michael. He didn't speak promises. Instead, he did something much more valuable. He kept every small one. If he said he'd call, he called. If he said he'd be home at 6, he was home at 6. At quotas when I understood something I wish I'd count an eyes earlier. Trust isn't built by grand romantic gestures. At quotas built by ordinance. Repeated every single day. Last month, I received one final message from Michael. It's simple stories. I never stopped regretting what I did. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because I hated him. But because some chapters are meant to stick close. Life taught me that betrayal doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it wears the face you've kissed goodnight for years. But it also taught me something even more important. The end of one marriage doesn't have to become the end of your happiness. Sometimes walking away from the person who broke your heart is the first step toward finding peace again. The end